Welcome to An Actor's Arc. I'm Sean Douglas, and this season I talk with 7 actors in the early leg of their artistic journeys, how they got started, and how they have found their footing. This episode I am pleased to be joined by WILHELM. Hello, WILHELM. Thank you for being on An Actor's Arc. Welcome.
Hello. Happy to be here.
We start these arcs at the beginning of the arc, and that is, for me, if you remember the first impulse that you knew you wanted to be an actor, felt the impulse to be creative in that way. Do you remember that? Was there a moment? Do you remember how that began for you?
Yeah, well, I began acting like a lot of us do in school. So I did my first play when I was 10 years old at my elementary school.
What did you play?
Oh, it was a play about the life of our very first president, George Washington. And I received the titular role of George Washington.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And I grew up as the oldest of 5 kids. So I had a lot of sort of like responsibility at home, like helping out. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad was a workaholic. And so just the dynamic was one that I was like often in a place of helping out. And theater was like kind of initially, honestly, for me, the first thing that kind of was like my sort of moments to like have something be about me and also get to share something with other people. So I did that first play and immediately was like, more, I want to do more. And so I did my first musical that summer. I was in a production of The Music Man. The town that I grew up in, every summer they would do, it was called Summer Music Theater in Rochester Hills, Michigan. And all of the surrounding high schools and all of the surrounding middle schools would come together and do one show over the summer. Enormous casts, enormous. One summer I was in an all-white production of The King and I that had 141 people in it. It was 2005, I want to say. We've learned a lot since then. And it initially was like fun. It was a way that I made friends, which, you know, was kind of hard for me as a kid. And I went to high school and I did every single, play and every single musical there. But I was also doing a lot of other things. I was like, taking debate class, and I was sort of in like the midpoint of high school. I was really thinking about like entering a pre-law sort of track, which my parents were like, woo, yes, do that. Theater is something that I was able to feel confident in and feel good at, and feel like it was a vehicle for me to like say something that I wanted to say or share something of myself that I really wanted to share. So when it got to that critical moment, I was like, you know what? I actually think I'm going to apply to theater school and audition for theater schools and see how that goes. And then of course everyone was like, oh, well, good luck. Hope that goes well. And I think I grew up in a suburb of Michigan, Detroit, Michigan, and I didn't have a lot of access to arts education. Like, we had an arts program in the way that every public school did, but, I was about to be going to college with all these kids from LaGuardia and like, arts high schools all over the country. And theater was like what I was really good at, it was what made me feel special. And in my high school, like being like, that actor theater kid, I was so not prepared for like being the best kid there was in Rochester Hills, Michigan. Oh, honey, there was like a lot to learn. So I like went into those next steps, I think with a lot of hubris, and had a lot of growing up and a lot of learning to do, and real life came at you fast. So I came from high school being like, oh, very talented, very smart, to going to Northwestern and being like, oh, now I'm with every most talented, smartest kid in their high school, in this context, I feel average at best. And that was like, that actually like really shook the little confidence that I had just learned how to, you know, wield. But that process, even though it was honestly like a lot of it was super uncomfortable, a lot of it was painful, but I think it led me to a lot of the life lessons that I use today in my actor life that like keep me sane and keep me going in what is an extremely uncomfortable, extremely disappointing, like really freaking difficult career for everyone.
You must have had some smarts going for you to get into a school like Northwestern.
At Northwestern, I went in having an understanding of myself and my identity as like, I am, you know, the theater kid, I'm the actor kid, you know, and now I'm going to a huge acting school where obviously everyone is coming with that understanding of themselves and is super talented as well. And a lot of me felt like I didn't really measure up or wasn't receiving attention. And I didn't really know why. I like college was basically me spiraling and comparing myself to everyone else for 4 years, which is never successful at any point in life. And certainly was not then. But I think the biggest thing that I had to start going on the journey of at Northwestern was I grew up in the suburb of Michigan, and I was moving from there to right outside Chicago in 2010. But I was coming from a place where there were not openly queer people. There were very few that I knew personally. And queerness was not something that was celebrated. It was like relegated to like an extremely weird othered state. And I already felt so weird and uncool that I at no point did I address any of that within myself. It was like squash, no, ignore, see ya. And then I went to theater school where there were tons of openly queer kids who were loving their lives. And when, you know, people approached me on that level, it wasn't an accusation or a witch hunt. It was like a desire to connect with me on that level. And I, like, my body and brain was like, I'm freaking out, I'm freaking out, I'm freaking out. Like, I don't know how to even accept like the love that is within this, because I'm so used to hearing this as an accusation that I deny.
Sure.
So I had to spend, you know, I spent my whole freshman year contending with that. And in the same way that I felt like so many kids were coming in here with a leg up on me, artistically, so many kids were coming with a leg up on like knowing who they are and being okay with that. And I felt like a lot of embarrassment for, you know, for some of the people who have known me since my freshman year of college and not being, you know, an openly queer person yet, because now that is who I am. That is like the most important part of my being, and what I lead with and what I walk into every room and every space and every conversation with is like being the queer person that I am, more so than being the artist that I am, more so than being the actor that I am. My queer identity is like the most integral part of who I am, and also comes into everything that I create. And I had no relationship with that, none. This is something that I thought a lot about, and I listened to another one of my friends, another very close friend named Rob Lindley, give an amazing metaphor on this very thing. So I'm going to credit him with that and reuse it because it really speaks to me, that when you are walking in with a sort of like invisibility cloak over who you actually authentically are, and then trying to like layer other things on top of that, the foundation is just like unclear. And like, we respond to and love actors and performances that are grounded in truth. And we're compelled by people who really just know who they are and have so much confidence in that. And I'm like so beyond grateful to consider myself someone who knows exactly who the fuck they are and how to carry themselves and how to move through space like that. Because the people who I've seen doing that are the people who've given permission for me to get here. And I know that that carries on. So I was not there at all at Northwestern. I was not close. I don't even really think I got very far, to be honest. Because at Northwestern, what I was able to do and what was around me at the time was an ability to like explore queer sexuality, you know, that.
Are you talking, when you say that, Will,
Yes.
exploring queer sexuality, are you saying that in the terms that you have been talking about, in terms of how it was artistically employed or useful, or are you talking about your life outside of that work?
That's a good question. Mostly outside, you know, by the time I was, you know, in my senior year, I was trying to, in acting class, whenever I could, like play a queer character or play a gay character. But what I mean, like queer sexuality, I mean, I was able to find space to explore my queerness in relation to other people, you know, in relation to sex, in relation to intimacy and attraction and relationships. What I was not even close, nowhere close to beginning to explore was queerness in relation to myself, queerness in relation to my gender identity. 12 years since I was a freshman at Northwestern, and 12 years ago, we were not having conversations about gender and its performativity in the way that I'm trying to have that conversation now. So when I got to Northwestern, what I felt like the task at hand was for me to perform masculinity effectively and convincingly. It could be gay masculinity. It could be, whatever is out there in the realm of like what is written and what do men and boys and male people do. But that was what was available to me. I was so far away from understanding myself as a non-binary person, as a trans feminine person. We got to these Shakespeare classes and I'm like, oh, I know I really want to play Juliet. I know I really want to play like freaking Lady Macbeth or Clytemnestra or like any of these characters. And I had an incredibly supportive acting teacher in Cindy Gold, who I'm obsessed with and remains one of like my deepest mentors to this day. And I think all of us in that room, myself, my peers, and Cindy included, were like, yeah, I mean, you could do it in the spirit of learning, in the spirit of exploration, in the spirit of class, but you'll never play Juliet. So like, if you want it to be productive, like if you want to work on a role you might get hired to play, like learn that Mercutio monologue, baby. And that made me really sad.
Did it make you feel like there wouldn't be an opportunity to fulfill something, a desire, a goal?
It mostly just felt wrong. Do you know what I mean? When you read the play and I'm like, okay, well, yeah, I want to connect with a character who feels as much like me as possible. I'm like, I don't like to, I know there are a lot of actors who are like, look how transformational I can be. I can do everything. I'm a chameleon. I'm like, great, cool. The skill, the technique, hats off to you, very good. But I don't see that many people that are like me on stage. I don't see that many people that feel like my experience. And so when I get on that stage, I want to represent me. I want to represent my community. And I want to pull that character as close to my experience in the world as humanly possible. So when I read that play and I think like, okay, who are the characters? We have, this sweet, probably handsome, but kind of whiny boy. We have his boisterous friends that like love to make the dick jokes. And we have this like fiery cousin who wants to fight everyone. And we have this girl who's trapped in her situation, but is extremely intelligent, really understands herself and knows what's going on and takes the opportunity she has to like reclaim her own agency on her own terms. And I'm like, I want that. That sounds like me. That sounds like something that I have grown up with. That sounds like something I have the ability to pour myself into and have it pour back into me and have me learn something new about my own self and my own experience and my own past. It just feels right. And so it took me a long time to understand or give myself permission that it's like, well, it's all performance. You know what I mean? It's all the performance of that character, but we all perform our gender identities in the world, in our lives. We're assigned our gender identities and we're taught how to perform them very young. So we have done them forever. It feels natural, it feels innate, but it's a choice. I think at some point, understanding that I am not really able to authentically perform in my life as Will. I cannot authentically perform maleness. I cannot authentically perform femaleness because neither of them really fit the person that I am.
If I'm hearing you right, you're saying when you're auditioning, when you're called in for something, and it doesn't on the page scream that there's an opportunity for you to connect in the way you've been talking about, you go anyway and you offer yourself.
Yeah.
And allow for the opportunity to see whether that is a possible fit, a new way for someone hiring you to think about it. Is that accurate, or am I missing something?
That's part of it. Yeah, for sure. And we say this all the time in so many different ways, but it's so important to repeat that the only thing that I can do best in this world, the only thing that I could do better than anyone else is be the most me that I can be. No one else can be more Will Wilhelm than Will Wilhelm. They can't. And I can't be more anyone else, I cannot be more Sean Douglas than you can. So that has to be my superpower. It's the only one that I have. And that's not going to be right for everything. It's not going to be useful for everything.
Sure.
It will be useful for the things that are meant for you. And I think that's also can be a lot of things. Something that I love from a non-Northwestern teacher that I had, her name is Janelle Snow, is that when you receive a breakdown, read it if you want, but then take the character description, cross it out, and write me. It's me. That's the only way I'm going to get the job, is if I decide this character is me. And then everyone else behind the table also decides, yeah, that character is you. Now, am I being informed by, the situation and the experience of how this person has gone through the world? Yeah, sure. I'm still acting, but I want it to read as much me as I can. So the way that I sort of internalize that in my head when I think of a character is, I think of everything that I am. I think of everything that I know in the text about who this person is. And I put as much in the middle of the Venn diagram as humanly possible. Certainly there will always be, some differences here, some differences there, but I fill out the middle section as much as I can. And I lean so heavily on everything that we share, because as that's what I know about myself. That's what I have that agility and natural sensibility with, is an understanding of myself.
I love that, Will, because it's related to something that I talk to my students a lot about, which is when you walk on stage, right? We have heard of the suspension of disbelief, but when you walk on stage, a lot of your work is done for you already by the playwright. You're in the middle of a story. You come on stage, you say, or someone says, oh, here is Juliet. The audience has to agree, or if they don't want to agree, they can leave the theater. But you are by just the fact you're walking on, you are that person for the audience. I guess I relate that to your story in that if you don't or not feeling comfortable about who you are as you walk in that space, you still can't accept that acceptance of the audience, right? Because you aren't able to offer the fullness of yourself.
Yeah. And I love that you just said that. Like, it's all the suspension of disbelief. That's the whole thing is based on that. So you walk on stage and someone's like, hey, sup, Juliet. And so the audience is like, okay, well, that's Juliet. I think, and I'm going to say, I do think actors self-sabotage on this and being like, am I unbelievable? Will they, could I? Yeah, I get it. I think that's an effect of like being in an industry that we're in. But I think a lot more to blame is sort of like the powers that be, the directors, producers, casting directors that are putting these things together are so afraid to take risks or so not imaginative so often. And they're over here like, okay, well, I'm going to present Juliet to someone. So who would an audience believe as Juliet? And just be like, not this person, too fat, not this person, too brown, not this person, too tall, too femme, too short, too masked, too this, too that. I'm like, oh my God, we have seen the play 800 million thousand times, and it will be done 800 million thousand times more. Whoever the fuck you say is Juliet, end of story. Like, give the audience way more credit to roll with whatever you give them. I understand right now when we're writing new plays, we're exploring a lot of identity politics, which I love and I think is something that we should be exploring in the American theater. And in those moments, yeah, the specifics of a sexuality, of a race, of a disability, of a lot of social locations where these characters are coming for, it's really important for them to match like what the character is holding so we can bring in that lived experience. But when we're talking about like two young people in love from families that don't like each other, that could be anyone in any setting. And I'm so over, for everyone, but especially like young women and young femmes, I'm so over who gets to be an ingenue, who gets to be someone that we fall in love with, who gets to be someone that we would like want to freaking kill ourselves for. Like, I would want to do that for someone with like a beautiful, big, open heart, a sharp wit and intelligence and like passion. Do you know what I mean? That could be anyone. As theater makers, we purport ourselves to be mostly like really liberal and really forward thinking, the majority of us. And I think we also have a great deal of responsibility in shaping not only how our culture and our community sees itself in the real world as we look around at each other, but also aspirationally, how we could see ourselves, how we could build a more inclusive and better culture. But that always, always, always involves taking risks and making mistakes and failing gloriously and swinging big and like sometimes hitting it out of the park and sometimes completely missing the mark. But I think a lot of theater is really built up around the commercial, because we live in this capitalist society that encourages us to compete, that encourages us to be the best, the most successful, and on top. And the only way to stay on top is to keep appealing to the masses. And I don't want to appeal to the masses. I don't want to be a household name to pat myself on the back and feel relevant. I want to be extremely relevant to the people who need me to be relevant. I want to be extremely impactful to my community to you, young queer and trans and non-binary people who don't otherwise have like people to connect with, people to look up to. And if that ends up having a wide stretch of people be impacted in any way, great, love it. Like I'm obsessed with that bonus prize.
What's powerful about that to me, Will, is I think we want to eat as artists. We want to feed ourselves. We want to pay our rent. And so there's that to be reckoned with. But I think it's also deeply empowering for actors to know that they have their own personal mission that they're trying to accomplish, whether it's in terms of the community they want to serve, the kind of work they want to do and elevate. Could be a million things, whatever your mission would be with your artistry. So I thank you for sharing that. That's great.
Yeah, of course. And
I want to take us back, if I may. Northwestern, graduating.
Yes.
Been on this discomforting journey personally and artistically. And so you came out of there not, I'm assuming, based on what you've said, not fully formed as an artist.
Oh, who does?
And so what happened for you in those first steps? Because I think those are important steps for a lot of young actors. What are those moments after school?
Yeah.
How do I go about it?
So I left Northwestern feeling shook. You know what I mean? Feeling so unsure of myself. What I didn't realize that I had learned that was about to be my most important tool was resilience. And understanding that I could fail 100, 1,000 times in a row and keep going and not let that define me and not fall apart. That's the hardest part. That is, I think across the board, that is the hardest part. Staying true to yourself and staying dedicated and staying motivated after constant and unending rejection. That is the career. Constant and unending rejection. But I felt like I was experiencing it for 4 years. I was still standing. I was still out there auditioning. I was still trying stuff. And I looked at a lot of my peers who I think were actually a lot more successful than me when it came to, you know, our time at Northwestern. And I watched them really struggle with that and not have an experience of like what it meant to fail constantly, what it meant to like have to muster that resilience. Because I was not always feeling like I was getting the opportunities I was wanting at Northwestern, and I was obsessed with comparing myself to all of my peers. I made a choice that I think was very smart for me, which was to start auditioning in the city pretty early on. So from the summer of my sophomore year, after my sophomore year, through graduation, I was working contracts in the city somewhat consistently, and small, you know, things. I was, you know, doing small non-equity musicals and new shows and readings, and I was understudying. I understudied at Northlight in my senior year. I had understudied at About Face my junior year. So I was beginning to create relationships, which is extremely important. And I left Northwestern with a lot of that in my belt. I had the relationships with professors and faculty that we sort of all had, but I had my relationships with some other existing theater companies as well. And I knew the theater companies whose work I liked. You know, I had been trying to go to openings, and I would meet people and try to make friends and just be involved. So that really helped. And I spent those first couple years after college, you know, doing a lot of musicals, a lot of like ensemble tracks, and, you know, a lot of musicals. At Northwestern, by the end of it, when I was trying to figure out, you know, like the type or my track or my future or like blah, 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 it was basically like, okay, well, you know, I can sing well enough, and I'm not a leading man. I'm doing my best to be like, can I be like a little chorus boy? The issue is I'm not out here kicking my face. I'm not out here, pulling out these stunts. So that was really not going to get me very far.
You're talking about dancing.
I'm talking about dancing, yes.
Yeah, good.
An essential component to the chorus boy track. At the same time, I was really trying to get in better touch with myself. I still had a lot of figuring out to do. Mm-hmm. But that was like manifesting in a lot of like harmful relationships with other people, and, a lot of just like being in gay nightlife, which was like fun in a lot of ways, but also like really toxic and harmful in a lot of ways, because there is a reduction in personhood often when things come to that space, because it's all about sexual currency, sometimes in some ways, in some spaces. And as a feminine person, I was still, again, just not measuring up, just not really being given worth, always feeling not good enough, in the same way that I felt in acting school, always just like never masculine enough to matter. Thank God, eventually, myself and my few like really close friends started to find spaces that weren't quite, the typical white gay male experience, and started finding spaces that were more diverse and more queer and more genderqueer, like spaces where we were given the opportunity to explore and to, like I said, swing big and succeed and fail and do all these things and just like have fun, not feel like we were constantly being analyzed and graded and never measuring up. So I found those spaces, and in those spaces, I felt comfortable really exploring my gender identity and my gender presentation and what made me feel good and what made me feel beautiful for like the first time in my life. And that was all I wanted to do. You know what I mean? That was just all that really made me feel like embodied and free. And when I would dance in those spaces and move my body, like I felt powerful instead of silly, and I didn't care like what I looked like or how I moved. I just cared about how I felt. And that was the journey that I was on for a few years.
In the arc of your journey to this person who is feeling really empowered and really rooted in who they are and what they have to offer that you've shared with me today, you are also trying to find work while you're on this journey, while you're having these experiences and opening up. And so what opportunities did that open up for you? And what challenges did that provide for you?
Initially, challenges only. So I was going to these spaces where, my two best friends were both drag queens. One was like a comedy performer, one's an academic. And I really loved having friends who didn't do theater. I need to have friends in community. I obviously have so many friends from my work, but I need to have people in the group who are not only performers or theater makers, because I think we lose touch with reality sometimes when we're in those spaces 24/7. And then we're like, well, who are you serving? Anyway, so both of my friends were like beginning their journeys with drag, which was really fun for them. And I was beginning a journey, like not with drag, but just with like really understanding what felt authentic and genuine to the person that walks around with me all the time, the person that goes to the grocery store, that visits their family in Michigan. Like, who is that person? And so I would be out late at night figuring all this stuff out. And then I would still be like, going to my shows and going to my auditions and trying to get work. And I would wake up and I would put on my little button down from Express and I would like put on my like cute little tight pants and I warm up my voice to sing my little chorus boy song. And that felt like drag to me. That felt like a performance of some other gender.
That created that distance that you were talking about before.
Putting on that costume of like what the chorus boy should wear to the audition, I felt like I was shrouding myself in a fucking paper bag. And it was sad and it was humiliating and it wasn't going well. Duh. Like, but I thought that's what I had to do. I thought like, that is what is available to you. That is your option. And I love theater. I love theater so much since I was a 10-year-old kid playing George Washington. I didn't want to give that up. So I was like caught, I was stuck, and I had no idea what to do because I, for years, was like, I cannot bring who I am at night into the day. I can't. It would be a waste of my time. I would be laughed at. I would be looked at funny. No one would understand. No one would care. And it was really saddening and frustrating and confusing. And I had a few very close allies and mentors who could sort of see what's going on from social media, because I'm posting on Instagram like look at my fierce, gorgeous look, like la la la. And then I am showing up, to the audition room doing my best to continue to present what I was taught to present at school. Because, at Northwestern, I didn't have the vocabulary to ask these questions. And even if I had, I don't know if there would have been anyone to give me a substantial or helpful answer. And I don't think that's anyone's fault. I just think that's the tools that were available in the building. And there were a lot of great ones that I really benefited from. And there were a lot of ones that I needed that I had to go out into the world and find for myself. So I was stuck for a little while, and I slowly but surely started being able to articulate the problem and what I was feeling very slowly. And I started bringing that to mentors, and including many people from the Northwestern community, John Hawes, Jess Fish, who was a MFA director when I was there. And they all understood my trepidation, and they all wanted me to be happy. I think I got a lot of affirmation and encouragement from people to spend more time with my authentic self and sharing that. And I think they all understood my fear, and I think they all shared, like, you're right, you might not get that many opportunities. You might not be working as consistently as you are, because it was mostly non-equity theater. I was not rolling in money, but I actually went since graduation, pretty much show to show to show to show to show, had them lined up. I was pretty much always in a show. And I felt very good about that. I felt pride in that, especially coming off of feeling like, kind of like the runt of the Northwestern class.
Were you represented at this time?
So I was doing all these non-equity shows, and I was submitting to all of the agencies, but I was just like, some random person who's like doing a bunch of non-equity ensemble musicals. They were like, I wasn't even getting called into audition, barely. Like it was not represented. So I got to the point where, at the encouragement of some people who I trusted, I started bringing more of myself into the audition room. I got some new headshots taken that were much queerer. I started, talking about myself and my identity and pronouns and all that kind of stuff differently. And I started sharing that and being transparent. And I did not work as often as I had been for a little while. But the opportunities that I was getting were way bigger, way more important to me, way more aligned to the things that I wanted to do. And so suddenly I was working at Steppenwolf and Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and I got an agent and all of these other, like, something changed very rapidly. And I think it had a lot to do, if not everything, to do with the fact that I decided to bring myself into that room, my whole self, and create from there, and bring my creations to as close to that whole authentic self as humanly possible.
I think that has to be it, Will.
It has to, you know. I mean, and the connections that I have made, the groundwork that I've laid since, you know, since I was a sophomore, that is all there. Do you know what I mean? Like I showed up to every single opportunity I had, every single conversation, and I just tried to be a good, kind, genuine person, which is so important and goes, like, people don't even realize how far, because I will connect with people who are like, yeah, you did a reading for me 8 years ago. And I'm like searching my email, like, not at all. But people do remember that. And so the connections and the network, like, really do add to it. But the shift in being given the opportunities that I wanted was absolutely directly related to, I don't know, it feels weird. I hate describing people being authentic as brave. Do you know what I mean? Because, like, I don't want to be brave. I just want to be myself. I don't want that to be an act of courage. But because of the community that we create in, I did have to, like, steel myself in a way and prepare myself for there to be consequences. In that moment, I was really contending with, like, will this be the end of my career? I thought very, very possibly this could be the end of my career. And in a lot of ways, it was the beginning.
Just in terms of craft, Will, were there moments in your progression, whether it was these non-equity productions that you started out in, whether as your career grew at a place like Steppenwolf and the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, where things were, your knowledge of what was required was elevated or challenged, or where you faced challenges you needed to meet, where you grew?
I think you grow in your craft in two major different ways: by doing and by watching. People forget about the second one. People are like, well, let me just do it. Let me just try it. Let me just do it. Do it. And I'm like, yeah, cool, great, of course. Experience, really important. But you also have to be paying attention to what's going on around you. Pay attention to what you think works. Pay attention to what you think doesn't work. Pay attention to how you do something differently. Pay attention to what you're like, ooh, I could never do that. How could I learn? But, you know.
So what was one of those moments for you?
Being at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival was like my grad school for 2 years. I have had the opportunities to do, like, some really juicy, meaty roles where I really got to sink my teeth into something gritty or scary or traumatic, or, you know, whatever the thing is, in a lot of storefront settings, which has been great and has taught me to be extremely honest and has taught me to be subtle in the ways that I think that sometimes is really important to have that groundwork. I think it's really easy to sort of amplify what, for me, I don't know, I'm a loud bitch. I think I can amplify something that I have built on a foundation of solid truth. I think it's really a lot harder to take something that's big and expressive and sometimes maybe performative in a way for a large house and, like, bring it into a small storefront space with like the utmost honesty and truth. I think that's a much harder challenge for what I've observed. Anyway, so I've had those opportunities to do the really hard stuff or the really challenging roles in those small storefront spaces. I have had the opportunity to work in some much bigger regional theaters in smaller roles, like, and as an understudy. And that's great. That pays my bills. That gives me relationships with companies and people and directors and playwrights that I hope to be using for my career, not using, but like enjoying and continue to collaborate with and make art with. And while I have been in those spaces, working with actors who are mostly older than me, I have been just sitting and observing and being a little sponge and, you know, watching how directors and actors communicate with each other and how they find middle ground and how they experiment, like all of these things. Watching something that has been really effective for me is watching actors advocate for themselves in a way where they aren't bringing in that sort of like, I know better, I know best energy. Do you know what I mean? Like effectively and kindly. That's something I pick up on all the time. I'm like, ooh, okay, note that, because that's something that I really want to be able to have in my toolbox for myself. The show that I did at Steppenwolf, it was called Straight White Men in 2017. And that was like very much kind of the turn. That was the you know, the first time that I was ever sort of like publicly claiming a genderqueer identity, you know, publicly introducing myself with they, them pronouns. Was first rehearsal at Steppenwolf, which is like 80 people. And it was a lot for me in the moment.
Yes.
And I was cast as an understudy. Straight White Men was written by Young Jean Lee, and that production was directed by her before the pre-Broadway production. And it was about this family of a dad and his 3 adult sons, 4 straight white men. And then there was this sort of framing device, external character that was just like some super queer, non-binary person that was like, we like had to play a lot with like what the character was named or referred to in the show, because it started as something that was like had to do like something with more like being a stage manager, and they were like, that's a little bit wrong. And so it ended up being called Person in Charge. Great, this is my first opportunity at Steppenwolf. They are going to see me as the understudy for this little tiny character every single hour of rehearsal, every single day. When the person I was understudying would not be called, and I would just be sitting in the room watching everyone work, watching everyone create, watching everyone like, you know, a draft of a new play, just learning, you know, not really distracting, not really taking up space, just observing. And by happenstance, we got to the end of the first week of rehearsal, and Young Jean was like, I don't really know if this device is working in the way that I've written it. It feels tokenized. Like, I hate that it's just this one, you know, this one person to represent the other. And I just wish it were a team, you know, that would feel better to me. I wish it were just one other person. And then, you know, and then she was just like, do you think like, could we just put Will in the show? Would that be okay to just like write them in? And I'm sitting in the corner like, and everyone turns to me and they're like, Will, would you be available or interested in being in the play? And I'm like, well, yes, I have to be available because I'm the understudy. And yes, I would like to be written into the play if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Yes, please. And so they just wrote me into the show. Because that, you know, and nothing to do with me, just because of the mechanics of the show. They were like, I hate this as one person, would love it as 2 people. There we go. And all I had done was show up every single day to do my thing and to learn and to be the sponge. But I think because I had done that, and because a need arose, and because I was consistently there, showing up for the opportunity, above and beyond what I was being asked to or called to do, it so happened that turned into my Steppenwolf debut.
I will say that when you say nothing to do with me, then you just mentioned a bunch of things that did have to do with you.
You're right.
And the choices you made.
I wasn't showing up with that, in mind, who is ever like, oh, as an understudy, you're like, I hope I get a chance to go on. Who's like, oh, I hope they change this play for me to put me in. But yes, you're right. It did have to do with, partially in part, the fact that I was really showing up so that when a need arose, it made sense for me to fill it.
And now my final questions.
Yes, let's do it.
First question, name an actor who you truly and deeply admire. It can be someone you've worked with, somebody famous, and a quick reason why you admire them.
I freaking love Alan Cumming. And I have watched him on television and in theater for so long that, like, before I really knew who actors were, like, you know what I mean? Before I knew, like, names of actors, I knew him as a kid as the villain in the Spy Kids movie, which is like, the movie that my family would watch, like, in the van on road trips, just like again and again and again. And then I grew up to see him in a bunch of other things. And I just love his comedy, how he can, like, be really biting, but also, like, so flamboyant and so ostentatious. I just think he has such an incredible range and such an incredible, like, electricity to him that every time I see him in anything, I really just, like, want to lean in. So I love Alan Cumming.
Second question is one thing that still delights you about being on stage.
Oh, the relationship with the audience, of course. I love when you feel like an audience is on your side in anything. And that could be like an audience, like, cheering you on for, like, falling in love, or it could be like you're in an argument with someone else on stage and you get a really good zinger and the audience is like, ooh, bitch. Like, I just love to feel the energy and, like, the molecular shifts of when an audience is, like, right in it with you. That's why I do theater.
Something that you are looking forward to accomplishing. Define that as you will.
Well, we didn't even talk about this at all, but I am really looking forward to, in the spring, will be the debut of my first solo show that I've been writing and co-creating with my friends Erin Murray, who was also a Northwestern MFA directing student. That's when we met. Yeah, it's called Gender Play, or What You Will. And I have been working on it, like I mentioned, for the past several years. And we've had some development and some workshops over the last year. And yeah, it's going to be debuting. About Face Theater is going to be producing the world premiere this spring. And so I'm both so excited about that and absolutely terrified because it's something totally new for me, doing a solo show and also having written a full-length piece. But I also, if I do say so myself, think it's really cool, and I'm really proud of the work that I put into it. And a lot of the conversations that we had today informed a lot of the world of that play. And it's not a play, it's not the solo show, like, about my life story in any way, but it is about, a sweet little genderqueer actor person named Will who wants to have more space in the world and more space in the classics. And so they conduct a seance and they find the ghost of a playwright named Will, who also has some grievances to air about how his canon has been preserved. And they go on a super queer journey together, and they reimagine a lot of the stories, and they unearth the queerness that was sort of always present in the characters and in the text. And it's really fun and it's really celebratory, and I'm really excited to share it with people.
Listen, I thank you for sharing so much of yourself, your whole self, today, and the challenges of your journey and the exciting moments of your journey. And I look forward to what's next for you.
Well, thank you, Sean. This is so lovely.
Oh, and one more thing from Will.
Also, because we're in the podcast world, I just want to mention that I too host a podcast. It's called Tea Cakes and Tarot Conversations with Queer Futurists. And every episode is me chatting with another queer theater artist from all different cities and all different professions. And we talk about what it means to be a queer person in the world and like make queer art. And I also give them a super nerdy little tarot reading that involves one tarot card and one Shakespeare sonnet. It's really delightful, and it's also available wherever you get your podcasts. So you won't hear me talk nearly as much on those. It's much more about my guests, but we've had some really, really amazing conversations through that medium that I would love to share with y'all.
Thanks for that. This has been an Actor's Arc. Created and hosted by me, Sean Douglas, with special guest Will Wilhelm. Theme music by Chris Kriz, sound engineered by Grover Hallway. An Actor's Arc Season 2 was made possible by a grant from the alumni of Northwestern University.